Hi, my name is David Richards. I'm a solicitor at Leith Prior. I specialise in construction law. I want to do a series of videos on the sort of thing that I advise on regularly in practice for builders, for property owners, and for others up and down the supply chain, as well as advisors and consultants. The myth that I want to talk about today is the idea of builders working with intolerances. Now, this comes up a lot when I'm advising builders. The builders will say to me, well, my work was with intolerance and therefore I ought not to be criticised. And it comes up a lot with residents and with property owners who say, well, the work wasn't with intolerance, so it didn't meet NHBC technical requirements, or it didn't meet certain other regulations that they think ought to apply to this particular case. First thing to say is whatever your contract says probably applies, right? So that's first thing to say. In lower value cases, often there isn't a formal construction contract, and if there are any terms, sometimes they don't apply to that case. Sometimes they've been downloaded from the internet. Or sometimes there aren't any at all, so if there's just an estimate or a quote or just done on a handshake. In that situation, the usual implied term into a contract for services is the obligation to take reasonable care and skill. Okay, so that's the good news for builders, is that's their obligation. You only have to take reasonable care and skill, not a counsel of perfection. One word of warning on that, of course, is that although the law only requires you to take reasonable care, which in theory should be the kind of care that the average person on the streets thinks that your work should be. In practice, if you take a case to court, you're going to be instructing an expert witness, and that expert witness is usually going to be top of their game. So let's say you've built a wall of bricks, your bricklaying skills are brilliant, the work you provided is exactly the same as you would normally provide and that everyone else in the profession would provide. The trouble with that is the expert witness will be the top of their game. They'll be the lead, leading light in bricklaying in the country. They'll give lectures and seminars and devoted a 40-year career to bricklaying, and you're going to be judged by their standard, which invariably is going to be higher. It's not fair, but that's how it tends to work. So there is a bit of a risk. It gets worse though for some contractors. If you are a design and build contractor and you do not have a construction contract, the implied term is to ensure that the product that you supply is fit for purpose. That's a very, very high standard. Even if you take all the care in the world, reasonable or not reasonable, it doesn't matter if the thing that you supply is not fit for purpose. There's a higher standard than architects, surveyors, engineers, all of whom only have to supply or have to provide a service that's reasonable. They only have to provide a service that the reasonable architect would provide, for example. Not the same for design and build contractors. Without a contract, they've got a fitness for purpose obligation. Classic case back in the 60s, Independent Broadcasting Authority against EMI Electronics and BICC Construction. Contractor was building a television mast. That television mast was designed reasonably by the construction company, the subcontractor, and EMI Electronics did more or less everything they could to make sure that the television mast was adequate, complied with whatever standards were around at the time. 2.5 years later, it fell down, whatever, all the way to House of Lords. House of Lords said that the contractor, even if it has taken reasonable care and skill, it's not enough. They are under an obligation to ensure that product is fit for purpose and that it works. Harsh on the contractor, but that's what happens if you don't have a construction contract. That, of course, is in the lower value cases where perhaps the paperwork is a little bit sparse and you haven't had teams of lawyers and contract administrators and architects and that sort of thing looking at the paperwork in advance. For the higher value case, the opposite can happen. So, for example, in the Robin Rigg case relatively recently, a case called Hurgard against E.ON. It was about a wind turbine, offshore wind turbine, and the contractor designed this wind turbine in line with certain industry standards. That was in the contract. The contract said you must comply with industry standards, and the contractor did comply with those industry standards. The trouble was that elsewhere in the contract documentation, which of course was huge, there was a 20-year lifespan requirement. The contractor argued, well, how could I possibly have ensured a 20-year expectancy if I was complying with the requirement? Well, the court said the contractor was supposed to improve upon that design to meet the 20-year requirement. So it's an extremely harsh result for the contractor, who in that case had to pay out tens, possibly hundreds of millions of pounds to fix this wind turbine that started sinking on itself. So simple lesson in that case is check all your contract documentation. If there are lots of documents with possible conflicts and you can't get those resolved, it is possible to have a sort of cascading rule so that you know which ones take priority to the other. Generally speaking, if you want to work within tolerances, the best thing that you can do is to agree those tolerances in advance. So if you say to the client, look, I am going to meet NHBC technical requirements and nothing more, fine, do that. It probably isn't enough usually just to say that you'll meet building control, but you can at least make that part of what you're going to provide. You might say British standards, you might say something else. Whatever it is, try to agree that with the client in advance. Not always possible, and if that isn't possible, then at least make sure that your obligation expressed in the contract, so in your terms and conditions, construction contract, whatever, is to take reasonable care and skill only, and not to ensure that the thing that you're going to build is going to be fit for any particular purpose. And that's it. If you have any questions, anything you need to discuss, please just give me a call, have a look at our website, leasebrad.co.uk, or give us a call at 01603